Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. We're thrilled you're here and interested in learning more about Allen Family Philanthropies RFP, Accelerating Natural Climate Solutions in the U.S. So my name is Andrew Golnar. I'm a program officer with Allen Family Philanthropies. I'm also joined by Dr. Yuta Masuda, the foundation's Director of Science. And as I said earlier, while some of you are joining, we will be recording this, so it'll be added to our webpage afterwards. All right, next slide. Okay, so today, briefly, we're going to cover who we are, why we're launching this RFP, and key eligibility and timeline details. The presentation will take about 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions. We're going to start with questions that came in during registration, and then we'll move to live questions as those come in. If you do not see your questions answered, please reference our FAQ, which we're going to continue to update after the webinar as well, and make sure that any key questions that went unanswered are going to be added up in there. All right, I'll pass it over to Utah.
Great. Next slide, please. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. I'm Yuta Masuda. I'm the Director of Science, and I lead and manage the environment program here at the Foundation. Before we get started, I just thought it would be helpful to provide some background about the Foundation, our program, our strategies, and kind of how this fits it within our broader efforts and our interest in driving environmental outcomes. So just some background here. So Allen Family Philanthropies was founded in 1988 by Jody Allen and the late Paul Allen, who's the co-founder of Microsoft. And we invest in communities across the Pacific Northwest and beyond to strengthen arts and culture, empower the next generation of changemakers, and support a global network of partners working to advance biodiversity and human well-being. And one of the through lines that we see across our programs is that communities and partnerships are really central to our broader approach. And for the environment program overall, we have a long history of working in the conservation space in North America and Africa for terrestrial conservation, and then globally for ocean conservation. And in particular, many of our efforts have focused on science and technology as a key part of a holistic approach to tackling conservation challenges. Next slide, please. And I want to provide first just an overview of our environment program. So very recently, we just had our strategy that was approved by our board. And in general, one of the things that we're really interested in with our strategy is that we advance the Foundation's mission for conservation outcomes and climate change mitigation and adaptation by supporting community-driven solutions that leverage science and technology, protect wildlife and habitats. And the environment program is really centered around three pillars. So the first is community-based natural resource management. The second is human wildlife coexistence. And then the third is high integrity natural climate solutions. And our perspective is that these three pillars really reflect our belief that communities are the entry point for catalyzing durable and impactful conservation actions, and that science and technology and then partnerships can work together through a community lens to have large scale impacts. And importantly, the priorities in our strategy are really meant to work together. So as an example, high integrity NCS likely confer biodiversity co-benefits such as through increased connectivity. And likewise, a robust community-based natural resource management approach, will integrate well-designed management plans for habitats and species, and improve both NCS and human wildlife coexistent outcomes. And again, a core belief here is that the communities are the entry point, and in science and technology, and partnerships can work to make broader changes across jurisdictional scales. So both place-based, regional, national, and international scope is of interest here. And that's one of the reasons why we're interested in this kind of idea around generalizable and scalable solutions. Next slide, please. And so as of this webinar, just a little bit about our portfolio is that we are funding 63 organizations. That's amounting to about $75 million in funding. And on our website, you'll see the diverse set of grantees that are advancing these very cool projects that are focused on science and technology and communities as a means to drive environmental outcomes across jurisdictional scales. And so for the purposes of this RFP, I think we've received already some questions about, what does a past grantee look like? That's an NCS project. That's actually listed on our website. If you go look, search the database, you can see some of these examples. And in fact, the RFP itself builds on last year's RFP that focused on place-based implementation. And that one really focused on, what is it about the implementation process and about partnerships that would make the case for a really successful high integrity NCS project. And through that kind of learning and through our grantees' experiences, we've really learned, okay, there is a real case to be made around, okay, we need to accelerate the implementation of NCS, and science and technology is a really critical component when done in partnership with communities and other key stakeholders. And so we were really kind of building off of the past efforts and really hoping that this RFP is going to accelerate our past investments and the lessons that we've learned. Uh, and so I'll pass it on to Andrew, who will dive into details about the RFP.
All right, so natural climate solutions represent one of the most high impact, shovel-ready opportunities we have to mitigate climate change in the US. They account for roughly a fifth of our national mitigation potential while delivering tangible benefits to local communities, ecosystems, and land stewards. But the key challenge for natural climate solutions is timing. So research suggests that if natural climate solutions are implemented too slowly, we'll lose as much as half of their climate impact by 2030. So the faster we can deploy rigorous NCS pathways, the more we can mitigate climate change. So right now, the US isn't deploying NCS fast enough or at the scale needed to meet our climate goals, and that's the gap we need to close. But the encouraging news is that recent publications have defined 8 barriers that are slowing or blocking NCS implementation, which provides a clear typology on what challenges need to be addressed to speed up NCS implementation. So these 8 barriers are broad categories that are further defined by specific constraints, which I'm not going to go into now, but you can see links to them on our website, and I encourage you to review those. We'll also add some links to the chat. Next slide. All right, so with a clear typology on what barriers are preventing NCS implementation, the Foundation wanted to know if there was a role for science and technology in resolving these barriers. So with the support of the Science Philanthropy Alliance, we and some other funders implemented an international survey to learn how practitioners are thinking about this space. The results are clearly demonstrating that science and technology innovations will be helpful in addressing all barriers to NCS implementation. So on the slide, you can see some example data from the survey for one NCS pathway, which in this case is forest restoration. And with responses across all 8 barriers, we learned from the community that they all believe all the barriers can be addressed with science and technology solutions. So although the opportunities and gaps vary for other NCS pathways, the same trend holds, suggesting that there's ample opportunity for science and tech innovation to accelerate NCS implementation. So with these survey responses, we're using them to understand the possibilities of solutions across all NCS pathways. So how generalizable some solutions may be. And also we're using this information to share with our expert panel that will be reviewing these proposals. So for those of you that have already taken the survey, thank you. And for those of you that have not taken the survey, I'd encourage you to do so. It's very helpful information. And so a link can be found in the chat as well as on our RFP webpage. Next slide. Okay. All right, so with the understanding that science and tech innovations can provide solutions to all 8 barriers that are slowing NCS implementation, the objective of this RFP is to fund partnerships that can develop, test, and ultimately deploy solutions that directly address barriers to accelerating the implementation of high integrity natural climate solutions in the US. So what are we looking for? Well, the Foundation firmly believes that successful implementation projects require a range of perspectives and expertise. So that's why we're looking for projects with diverse partnerships, which are teams that bring together researchers, practitioners, communities, landowners, and other end users who will actually be applying these solutions on the ground. So for example, a scientist may understand exactly how to measure climate mitigation potential, but they may not know the best way to deploy the technology in a community, or whether it truly meets the community's needs. Because these projects are focused on implementation, we know that no single group has all the answers. It takes a combination of scientific knowledge, practical experience, and local insight to create solutions that actually work in the real world. So we're looking for rigorous methods with a clear plan for how you will measure and evaluate whether the solution works. We're also looking for a logical pathway to deployment, so make sure to describe how the solution moves from idea to field use. And finally, we're prioritizing solutions that are scalable and can be adapted across different contexts. We're not looking for solutions that only work in a single setting. Next slide. So what do we mean by high integrity NCS? So we're referring to actions that stem from responsible human stewardship of ecosystems, actions that do not push ecosystems further away from their natural structure, composition, or function. So high integrity solutions are science-based, transparent, equitable, and environmentally sound. They deliver real, measurable climate benefits, not just on paper, and because they rely on credible baselines, rigorous monitoring, appropriate social and ecological safeguards, and long-term stewardship. So this standard helps us ensure that the solutions we invest in genuinely contribute to climate mitigation while respecting ecological integrity and community priorities. Next slide. Okay, so to help illustrate this point, here are a few examples of what is high integrity and what is not high integrity. So something that is not high integrity would be replacing natural forests with monoculture, tree plantations for future clear cutting. But an example of high integrity would be an organization that's changed their logging practices to avoid unnecessary damage to the forests where they harvest wood. Another example would be, I'm just reading these from the slide, reforesting productive croplands, and in doing so, that leads to greater food insecurity. So that would not be an example of high integrity. While an example would be implementing agroforestry into croplands that increase carbon storage while also providing new food crops that has negative impact on food insecurity. Next slide. Okay, so to be eligible, projects must take place in the US or US territories. Eligible organizations include US-based nonprofit 501c3s, units of state or local government, and state colleges or universities. Non-US organizations may also participate as long as the work funded occurs fully within the US or its territories. Applicants must specify their NCS pathway, identify the barrier or barriers they're aiming to address, and show how their work aligns with high integrity NCS principles. Applications proposing new or novel NCS pathways are eligible as long as applicants can demonstrate they are high integrity. In the LOI, so the letter of interest and the full proposal, project teams must propose to develop a generalizable solution. So the key intent here is to ensure that we're developing solutions that can be adapted to other circumstances to further accelerate NCS implementation. In the LOI and full proposal, we'll also ask project teams to explain clearly why the proposed solution is well positioned to overcome the identified barrier. So ideally, this work will be embedded within an existing NCS project. Next slide. Even if a project is eligible, there are hallmarks of a strong project that we think are worth elevating. So these include projects that have a mix of scientists, practitioners, policymakers, community members, and other end users. A strong project will ensure that responsibilities are shared appropriately across the team, rather than relying on a single individual to do everything. A strong project will center the design, implementation, and decision-making of solutions and activities based on local community needs. So we're looking for clear, rigorous study designs that develop, test, and validate the proposed solution in real-world contexts. So projects that have co-funding are also viewed favorably because it signals feasibility and long-term durability. So to be clear, we consider co-funding as financial commitments, not just in-kind contributions. Again, we're open to projects exploring new or emerging NCS pathways, and we're not prioritizing any specific co-benefits such as biodiversity, human well-being, or other ecosystem services. Applicants should focus on the pathway and barrier that are most relevant to their work and how their solution can be applied effectively in practice. All right, next slide. I wanted to share more about the review process, and then we'll jump into the questions. So right now, you can submit a letter of intent through our portal until January 15th next year. And this will be ending at noon, specifically Pacific Standard Time. So make sure you get those in early because this is a hard deadline. The LOI is meant to be simple and light touch, and it's a way for you to clarify your idea and communicate it to the foundation. We don't need multiple pages of explanation. We will invite full proposals by email on February 5th. Proposals must be submitted through our Flux grant management system by March 10th, 2026. And for evaluation purposes, the foundation is running an objective process where we're recruiting a panel of external experts, similar to an NSF evaluation process with independent reviewer and broader deliberation on the strength of proposals. The final funding decisions will be announced in Q3 of 2026. And I think it's important to note that we will be unable to provide feedback on individual proposals. And also, although we cannot guarantee co-funding for this initiative, applicants can opt into sharing their proposals with other funders. Next slide. Okay, with that, we're going to open it up to questions. We're going to start with the pre-submitted questions, and then we'll move on to the questions that have been submitted today. And if we do not get to your question, make sure that you reference the FAQ. We will be updating that over the next few days with questions that we weren't able to get to.
Yeah, and I can start here with some of the pre-submitted questions, which thank you for doing that. And I think first and foremost, a lot of the questions actually that we have received are in the FAQ itself. So I would really encourage everyone to make sure to thoroughly review the RFP webpage. It has a lot of information. We put a lot of thought into it, and hopefully most of the information is there. But that being said, not everything is answered. So we've already received a lot of questions around specific projects being eligible, very detailed around things like, oh, we want to restore shoreline. Does that fit within the scope of the RFP? So on and so forth. And one of the things that I think we really want to emphasize here is that the emphasis of the RFP is not on a specific project implementation per se. It's really about funding projects that overcome these key barriers to implementation, where a specific project that is the focus of a proposal may provide an opportunity to develop, test, and ultimately deploy this solution to overcome whatever the barrier is to NCS implementation of the project, right? So if a proposal clearly outlines why that project is well situated to fit this requirement of developing, testing, and deploying the solution, then it's eligible under the RFP. The project, of course, around NCS, it has to be high integrity. So we're going to ultimately be asking proposals that are invited for full submission to outline like, do they meet the key principles around high integrity NCS? So that is definitely a requirement. But as long as it does, then the core of the RFP is again around generalizable, scalable solutions for overcoming barriers to implementation. So again, it's really focused around please identify the barrier and sub-barrier of interest that the project will focus on, create a narrative structure explaining, and providing some evidence around why that barrier is in particular a challenge to rapid NCS implementation and the proposed solution and partnerships, how that will be key to overcoming a specific barrier. So that I want to make sure that that is very, very clear that that is the focus, not specifically on implementing one specific project. Why don't I take the next question here too, Andrew, just to keep it going. There's also been a lot of questions about co-funding, understanding that we have asked that co-funding is very much preferred, and that what does that actually mean in practice? So as Andrew has mentioned during the presentation, strong proposals will have some indication of co-funding. So that means not in-kind support, but actual financial support for a project. And so for this LOI phase, so again, LOI is supposed to be very light touch, an easy way to share an idea about your project, to let us quickly review. So it's supposed to hopefully not take too much time. So the co-funding can at this stage come from a softer commitment, so general commitments to provide X amount of dollars in project funds. But of course, it'd be great if there's actually firm commitments around funding as well, that you say you can have funding in hand. And even with co-funding that in hand, one of the things that we do ask that in a proposal or in a project, funding from this RFP and from our foundation be going towards a very discrete and identifiable activity. And so, as an example, let's say you have a restoration project and you say, well, we already have $15 million in hand to do that restoration, and this $2 million will just augment that, and we'll keep doing that thing. Well, it's very hard to say what are the funds from our foundation going towards in that case if it's just going into a broader pool. And so instead, what we ask is that there's a clear articulation of, oh, okay, you're asking for, $1 million from this RFP, and it will fund these activities directly that complement the co-funding or the activities supported by the co-funding. So that'll be really important that it's not just kind of going into a larger pool of funding that's just going to kind of be all mixed together and fund a whole slew of activities per se. And so lastly, in terms of co-funding, those that are invited for to submit full proposals, we will most likely be asking for some letters of support or some indication that the funding is actually in hand for those that are actually claiming that they do have co-funding already committed and ready to go. All right. Andrew, do you want to take the next question? Because we
Yeah, I
have a
can
lot
take
coming
this
in.
one. So, this question's about if there's a guidance document that could be provided in advance for the LOI and full proposal. So the LOI questions are visible and downloadable via a PDF once you register in Flux, which is our grants management system. And then if your project is invited for a full proposal, those questions for the full proposal will then be made available in the system once you're invited. Um, I can take this next one here too. So there was another question. So do projects have to address all 8 barriers to NCS implementation to qualify? Uh, no. So applicants just need to clarify why their specific project is strategic for addressing a specific barrier to NCS implementation. So during the LOI as well as during the full proposal, we're going to ask applicants to identify specific sub-barriers and the constraints that they're addressing with their projects. And this is to help the panel understand the exact barrier that's being targeted by the proposed solution.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think one of the things again, the RFP is about overcoming barriers to implementation um, for NCS implementation. And the more specific that a proposal can be around what's the barrier, what's the solution, what's the context, all those things, keep in mind that there's so many different types of projects that exist. Like, there's no way that we would know everything about every stakeholder group, every geography, every ecosystem. And so we really do ask that prospective applicants really kind of paint that picture for us and provide kind of relevant information to support certain kinds of statements. And one of the things that we were really excited about with this RFP is that this new paper that does create this typology allows us and an expert panel to really evaluate them based on kind of a more fixed framework structure. We realize that not 8, there might be some constraints that are not captured within the 8. I uh, I think they're quite broad, and so I would be surprised if that's the case, but certainly it is possible. And so we do have an option of saying, oh, actually, there's a barrier that's not listed. Here is what it is, here, and kind of explaining to us what is that barrier, what's the proposed solution to overcome that barrier, and why is it distinct. So again, that is really a core crux of the RFP itself. I can take this next one because it is quite general here. So how do you define nature-based solutions? So again, this really goes back to high integrity NCS. NCS are just a subset of nature-based solutions that consist of these intentional pathways to protect, restore, manage ecosystems with a climate mitigation lens. There are likely more than 22 pathways. So we have a list on the webpage of the ones that we are considering, but certainly if there is one that is not on there that you think is really important for your project, you can propose a project around it. The thing that we really ask for is that you provide sufficient evidence that it is actually providing mitigation services, that there is a mitigation service to it, that it does help meet the NCS criteria. So some of the questions that we received are, I haven't seen evidence that it is a rigorous kind of high integrity NCS. It is still very much an important climate solution. It just does not fit within how we are defining high integrity NCS. So if your project topic NCS pathway is not listed in the table, definitely think about, do you have the evidence to demonstrate that it is a high integrity NCS, that it does have mitigation potential? And if so, feel free to create a project around it and submit it as an LOI. Again, the LOI is meant to be kind of a low barrier to entry, a way of showing and sharing a project with us just to consider. Right. Should I take another one, or Andrew, do you want to take one more?
You can take one more.
Okay. Let's see this question. Oh, this is one about barriers again. So many of the barriers are related to governance structures, legal frameworks, and political will. Would addressing these barriers be outside of the scope of this RFP? No. Uh, I think we've received actually several questions around what do we mean by science and tech and what barriers are really important, so on and so forth. And here, really, science and tech is really about, the use of research to uncover new insights, whatever else to illuminate new solutions. And it can be social science, so behavioral sciences, those kinds of things, economics, political science, sociology perspectives. It could be physical science, it could be natural science, it could be engineering solutions. Those all count within that. And so you're taking a very, very broad perspective of science. As long as there is kind of a rigorous research design, a research question that's kind of driving the testing and development testing and deployment of that. Technology, likewise, is that use of that information to really make it into a usable form and kind of a technology for deploying that kind of thing. And we're open again to many, many different types of solutions. Again, one of the reasons we're excited by this framework for barriers is that, for lack of a better word, we don't have all the expertise, of course, and in fact, we may lack the imagination to fully think about all the different types of solutions that exist, which is why we wanted to run this RFP, is to really be excited and see what is out there that is being developed by everyone here on the call and others and your partners as well. And so as long as it is really rooted in kind of a science and technology lens to overcoming something, then that is very exciting. So even if it is a communications campaign to change behaviors, and I think, sure, that's under behavioral science. But what is the kind of core question driving it? What's the testing of that? Is there a kind of a rigorous method that's underpinning the development and the deployment of that prospective solution? Is it generalizable? These kinds of things that really the hallmark of a rigorous kind of scientific approach is of interest. All right, Andrew, do you want to take the next
Yeah,
one?
so I have another question here. It's on project scalability. So the question is, how do you distinguish between project level innovation and truly generalizable system level solutions? So they continue, if a solution is proven at one site but clearly scalable nationwide, does it meet your definition of generalizability? So I think the quick answer is yes, that meets the definition. So it's challenging to truly distinguish whether a solution will be scalable and generalizable, but we believe there are several indicators that signal these. So, for example, the broader policy and social contexts are clearly communicated in a proposal to demonstrate whether or how a potential solution will leverage some broader mechanism. Whether there is past precedent that a similar approach or mechanism worked, or whether the project has the right partners to ensure scalability and generalizability, et cetera. So in short, we're asking applicants to clearly convey the logic that's underpinning these statements about a solution's scalability and generalizability with supporting evidence. And so this is related to the general theme here that this is your opportunity to make the case of why your project will be impactful within the parameters we're setting up.
Why don't
Do
I
you want
why
to?
don't I take this one since this
Okay.
is keeps coming up actually both in our pre-submitted and submitted questions. Um, this is related to just the broader process. So is there a limit of how many proposals may be submitted by each organization? This is actually in our FAQ. So again, I would really recommend everyone take a close look at that. But no, there is not really a limit to the number of LOIs that are submitted by an organization or organization can submit multiple, they can collaborate with partners on multiple LOIs, but we really ask PI to be a primary lead on only one LOI. And the other thing that I would really think about strategically if I was an organization, of course, is if you have, let's say, 10 projects that are very, very similar, closely aligned, is there a way to just package that together into one LOI, into kind of a tighter design or something? Um, in part because again, like we're going to just be reading so many of these, and so it's important that they are kind of distinct and well formed rather than just kind of repeating over and over again. So I would really think about kind of what is again the barrier that's overcome, and if there are several that can be overcome through a project, wonderful. Like just articulate that in the LOI. Who are the key partners? Again, partnership is really key. Not one organization isn't going to hold all the knowledge and the expertise. I think that's quite rare. And what's the setting and kind of what's the case that can be made. All right, Andrew, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so we had a question come in that was looking for clarification on what we mean by opting in to sharing proposal with other funders. And so what this means is there will be a button in the grant management process that you can toggle on or off, but this is essentially giving your consent to share a full proposal with other funders that are interested in supporting this space. And so what we're trying to do here is provide opportunities for further funding because we're limited to the 10 million bucket we've been approved for, but there's potential opportunity for co-funding. And so this is just a question of whether you'd be okay with us basically sharing this information with those interested parties.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so we are um, in the US, in particular, we're involved in a number of conversations with other peer funders that are really interested in NCS projects and this very kind of RFP that we're designing. And we love sharing information and lessons with other peer funders. And so this is very much like if folks are interested, I know that other funders are always looking for projects, for ideas to get a lay of the land. Again, this is the information that comes in as part of the RFP is really, really valuable information to understand what are people working on, what are the kind of really exciting innovations that are happening, as well as, the survey itself that we've asked you to fill out. That information is also shared with peer funders as a way of saying, here are the kind of key barriers that folks are trying to tackle, that are top of mind. Here are the potential innovations that are coming along the line. It really helps kind of educate a funder group that we are part of. And so it is totally up to the applicant, whether or not that information is shared, but that's kind of the benefit side of things. We can kind of help communicate the work of others to other funders that are in the space. Um, why don't I take another question here around, let's see. So question says, I'm interested in what balance of research versus conservation implementation is desired. Um, so this is an interesting question in that we're interested again, this RFP is really focused on the development, testing, and deployment of a science and tech solution to rapid NCS implementation. And so you can imagine that there's going to be a right emphasis in the budget and the activities funded by the budget around, okay, what do you actually need to develop and test something for a potential solution? What does that mean? It could mean some implementation for sure. What does it mean to deploy that? But again, the emphasis is very much on that solution, right? And the barrier itself and what it's overcoming. So we really leave it to applicants to tell us, at least in the LOI, of like, here is the proposed project. It could be very implementation heavy for sure if you have a solution that's really ready to go and you really want to figure out kind of the nitty-gritty of certain things. Again, it's kind of in the broader setup, and we leave it to the prospective applicant to tell us what that kind of balance might be and really make a case for it, so that we can be fully bought in. Andrew?
Yeah. So I have a question here that is essentially related to, are we setting priorities for any specific co-benefit, such as biodiversity, food security, or human health? I think the answer here is we're not prioritizing any particular co-benefit. We appreciate when that's clearly articulated, but this is not a specific, I guess, prioritization for the review process. And so
Yeah.
there was a related question. That was, are we prioritizing certain habitats like wetlands or fire adapted forests? And so same answer, no, the foundation's not prioritizing certain habitats or geographies, except for the US as a whole. And so strong partnerships, study design, and co-funding, these are the priorities that we're going to be looking for to identify strong projects.
Yeah. Not necessarily priorities, but like the hallmarks of a strong
Hallmarks of a
proposal.
strong project,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think this has happened with NCS pathways as well. Like there's so many questions around what are our priorities. It's not really that. It's really around kind of the core idea. And so a strong proposal again will have those components that Andrew just mentioned. So I would definitely keep those in mind as you guys develop the LOIs. Actually, this is another similar question around like, is there a preference for scale, national versus state? It really is whatever is appropriate for the project. So if, for instance, a potential solution is best tested at a kind of micro level, like a very place-based household level, sure. Like if that's the scale that makes sense for testing and for rigorous understanding of whether something needs to be tweaked and before it's fully deployed, that makes sense. Maybe there's a state level intervention. Great. So what would that be? Like tell us what the design is, why that's the right unit of intervention, so on and so forth. So again, it is really dependent, and it's really about kind of the strong partnerships, the creativity, the real barriers that are being implemented, how generalizable and scalable a potential solution is. Those are kind of the key things of interest here. One of the things I will say is that, again, going back to the survey that we're asking folks to fill out, is it does really help us and the expert panel really understand the scope and scale of different barriers that are being tackled across different pathways. So it's one way for us to understand, okay, where are there real choke points that have some commonalities? And we're not necessarily going to say that that will drive the selection of proposals, but it certainly is a really important piece of information to help us understand where there are kind of key barriers across ecosystems, across NCS pathways. I encourage you to fill out the survey, ask your colleagues to fill out the survey. It is a really important piece of information that is going to be useful for us as we um, read through the different LOIs and consider different proposals.
I have a question here. What level of monitoring pre or post restoration might be supported through this grant? And so to answer this, the goal of the RFP is to fund science and technology solutions that are overcoming barriers to increase the speed of NCS implementation. So the extent at which monitoring is needed to demonstrate success for the project and the method for overcoming that barrier, that's what's appropriate. So there is no prescripted level of monitoring that's needing pre or post. It needs to make sense for the specific case of the solution you're proposing.
Let me see here. Here's one around some co-funding questions. Um, would an existing project that has momentum and needs additional funding to scale be eligible? This depends on a few factors, I think. But one of the things we look for is that the contribution and the activities funded by the foundation support is really clearly distinguishable. So, um, for instance, if there's a project that's like 95% funded to develop some new technology to overcome a barrier, and the RFP funding is just filling in that last gap, I wouldn't really say that that is the most competitive and exciting project. But if there's something that's being additive to that technology development, let's say like testing the deployment through experimentation by adding a behavioral strategy or something of that nature, then that would be very competitive and very interesting to us. So certainly there are certain projects that if you already have co-funding, there's a lot of momentum behind it. Sure, like maybe there's something that you've learned in that process that this particular RFP and funding opportunity would be a really great fit for. Andrew?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a question that came in, and a number of these actually before the webinar. So this is basically around indirect costs and whether there are indirect costs that can be integrated into the RFP proposal. And so the foundation does not allow indirect costs as a percentage of the budget, and instead we ask for proposals to include activity-based budgets. And there was another question around whether admin costs can be included in an activity budget, and yes, I think that they can be. And so you just need to clearly articulate why a cost is needed for the project-based goals.
This is a similar question, I think somewhat similar to the one I just answered. So there's a lot of questions about, I think on our website we say, projects that are ideally embedded within an existing NCS project, and kind of what we mean by that. So the thinking behind that language is actually around the fact that because these solutions that we're asking people to potentially develop around specific barriers, um, we want them to be in line with NCS implementation. So let's say that you are developing some new mapping technology that's going to overcome some knowledge gap barrier or whatever else. Great. But if it's just completely agnostic and divorced from some NCS implementation project, it's it's not really being tested. And so, and it's not going to really be deployed in an effective way. You don't really actually know if that's going to be the key thing that's going to help NCS implementation. So the idea there is that, a project and a proposal should be able to say and tie very closely to, and that's why we say embedded within, whether or not that specific solution is actually overcoming a known barrier to implementation. And one of the best ways to do that is you test it within an existing implementation process, for example, right? So that's kind of the motivation behind that. It doesn't necessarily always have to happen that way. Again, it depends on the project design and all these other things. But I think, again, that might be one of the hallmarks that we would look for is like, okay, this actually has a lot of credibility. This is really rooted in an implementation and they're learning from this process through the actual testing of this in an existing program or, or something of that nature. So that's one of the motivating reasons behind that language on the website.
I have a question on eligibility, and then another on partnerships that are related. So this one was basically asking, are you open to project teams that include for-profit partners? And so
Mm,
organizations are eligible to apply for this RFP. And basically the take from the foundation is that these organizations can partner with whoever at their discretion to carry out the charitable activities of the project. So I don't believe a for-profit organization can be the lead, but they can definitely be subcontractors.
hmm
And
Yeah.
then related, another one came in, can new non-US organizations apply? And the answer is yes, as long as the activities are being done in the US.
That's right. Yeah. And I think for non-US organizations, like, again, the key is going to be partnerships. So you can imagine, maybe some scientists or technology folks are headquartered outside the US, but they have really key partners in a way to test this, and the project is based in the US. Sure, they can be the lead organization. They just have to make the case again of like, who are the partners within the US? Who are the right setting? What's the right setting? What are you testing? How do you know that's the right barrier in that particular location? So on and so forth. So again, that narrative case making, making sure that that's very, very clear to us. Let's see what other questions we have here. Project fit. Andrew, do you want to take another one real quick?
Yeah. So is this funding programmatically restricted or for general operating? And so what are the guidelines to funding if program restricted and what are the deliverable requirements? So this RFP, this funding opportunity will fund program related costs. And we ask that applicants propose how they would use their funding to support the goals of this RFP and their intended work. So in other words, these are not unrestricted funds and should be tied to specific programmatic goals and activities. We don't want to prescribe how the funds will be used on project-related costs, but we're eager to understand how this funding will be used by the prospective grantees to optimize the funds. And so again, it's a narrative, and so the funds and the budget need to match the goals.
Yeah. Let's see. Can collaborations and partnerships be finalized after an LOI is invited to submit a full proposal? For context, I understand that all partnerships should be confirmed before submitting the full proposal. Yes, they can be fully finalized once a proposal is invited. But that being said, there has to be some credibility in the LOI, right up around like, you know, perhaps saying one or two, yes, or two or three sentences about what is the basis of the partnership that's being proposed, right? Like there's experience working together in the past on past projects, so on and so forth. It's a past coalition, all those other things. Um, there's another one here about there seems to be some tension in my mind between community-driven, core principal value, and generalizable, scalable. Can you explain how these dual mandates work together in the organization's visions for this RFP? Yes, happy to. One of the things that we are looking for is, of course, a community-driven approach in the sense that we really think that communities in general are entry points. So community is very broadly defined. So they could be groups of farmers, it could be IPLCs, those kinds of things. But essentially, like the context is what really matters the most, that conservation occurs in a very place-based local manner, and all those things. Okay. Science and technology, again, one of the things that we are really interested in doing is finding generalizable solutions. So it is very likely that the core aspects of a solution that work in one community can be adapted and or adopted by another community and or community advocate in a different setting. And that's what we really mean by generalizable is that it doesn't have to kind of stamp one on one, but the core of that intervention can be kind of replicated in other settings. When done with the right partners and the right context and all those other things. So that is really the idea is that we were really interested in these solutions that, okay, if financing is the key issue, if governance is the key barrier, if knowledge and behavior is the key barrier, there might be some kinds of solutions that are generalizable across settings. And again, one of the key components that we're really interested in here is, there's been these studies that have been done around how the speed and scale of implementation of NCS is one of the most important things for NCS to meet their climate mitigation potential. And to do that, we are interested in the role of science and technology to overcome these key barriers. So that is, again, the core crux of the RFP here, and that these solutions are best done when they're developed with community partners, their advocates, so on and so forth. Right, Andrew?
Yeah. So would nonprofit organizations focusing on the finance barrier of NCS be considered? So yes, we know financing is a challenge to implementation, but the point of this funding call is to not just say we will provide funding for these projects, but rather the foundation will support a project that develops and tests a strategy to remove financial barriers. Um, so this is just making that critical, uh, I guess, jump to like having a mechanistic impact on this space that can be generalizable. So
Hmm.
here it's, yeah, it might be around what uncertainties and partnerships exist or preventing scaled funding to projects. But yes, that would be acceptable, and we'd be curious to see what your solution is.
I can take the next one. So what is the per project budget maximum? Or is there kind of a range that you're interested in? I think this is on the webpage, but we're considering funding up to 6 to 7 projects. And so we've allocated about $10 million for that for the RFP. So it really just depends, again, on the scale of the solution. So any budget that is going to be proposed within a project should really reflect the scale and the implementation and the potential impact. But our expectation is that that's kind of probably be ending up being around 6 to 7 projects overall. So that's about like 1.6, $1.7 million per project. One of the things we are really looking to do again is, we are in discussions with other funders in the space. We're always interested in socializing really promising projects, in particular to see if we can generate even more funding opportunities, sharing different ideas, all those other things. So while that is the cap, we're really hoping that this will be kind of a good basis for additional funding opportunities as well.
Okay, we're gonna round out the questions right now. But Utah, did you want to take this one on wireless fencing first?
Sure. Um, so this is a very, I think, a specific take on uh, is our project eligible? So it says, would a wireless fencing technology that leads to more efficient, impactful cattle grazing practices be eligible? Um, so again, if the project is focused on just buying more wireless fencing collars or other components, or things like that, no, because it doesn't really identify or overcome the key barriers that's preventing the approach from scaling to other ranchers in this case. Um, so really any project again should focus on what the science and technology solutions will be for overcoming the barriers to that implementation. Um, so where the thought is really like, are there some unknowns or technical barriers that are preventing it rather than just kind of a raw funding gap that's needed for rapid deployment? So that's again kind of the key motivation here. So I'd encourage applicants to really think about what is the barrier, what's the potential solution, how is your project going to help develop that solution for that barrier to implementation in general. Let's see here.
Okay. Do you see any? So we've gone through over 300 questions right now that we've been reading through. I think that, we're trying to wrap up right now. Do you see any more that we need to cover today, Utah, or others?
Just take a look one more time here.
Um,
I think so many of these questions that are coming in are very project specific or like eligibility of a specific organization. And so to those, like that is very much on our RFP webpage. So is a regrantor eligible? Is fiscally sponsored? Yes, those are eligible. It's just really again around the partnerships, around um, is the project focused on a specific solution? So as an example, a regrantor, if it is just around providing raw funding for other programs, that is probably not the best fit. If it is around working with partners to develop and test solutions for overcoming barriers, yes, that would be a good fit. Likewise with fiscal sponsors. If your organization has a fiscal sponsor, yes, you're technically probably a 501(c)(3, you're an eligible organization. What is the project that is going to be pitched that fits within the scope of the RFP itself? And again, I think the other thing is around kind of the science and technology, the definitions around that. We are open again to all kinds of science. It is really about the partnerships, is really about the study design around how are you going to develop, test, and deploy that solution, and what specific NCS barrier is it really overcoming. Again, we really want to be excited and see these really creative projects that are going to overcome these barriers, but we need to be told from all of you who have much more knowledge about the context and the opportunities that are in play across, really across the US and the US territories, for what are those opportunities and what's the right partnerships and potential solutions that can be developed through this opportunity itself. So it can rely on social science, it can rely on physical, natural science, technologies, engineering solutions, all those things. Um, let's see. And actually, there's I think one more question that has come up a couple of times around whether the funding opportunity will fund planning implementation. Um, this really depends on the project. So in general, if it's just kind of a broad planning process that's going to occur for 2 years out of a 3-year grant, it is probably not a strong proposal for further consideration. We understand that planning is going to be part of the process, especially with partnerships. And so, sure, it could be included in part of the project activities and process, but the core of that project being proposed should include the development, the testing, and the deployment of the solution itself, right? And likewise with that implementation piece. If implementation is part of that deployment and testing, absolutely. That can be part of the proposal that is being pitched to us as part of the RFP. Um, Andrew, anything else that's popping up to you? I know that we're slowly running out of time here.
Yeah, I think at this point, we're going to be going through all the questions that came in and updating the FAQ. So definitely be checking our website if we didn't get to your question. Look through all the materials that are linked on the website. Please, if you have not taken that survey, take the survey. That would be helpful. And remember that the LOIs will close at noon Pacific Standard Time on January 16th. And I would highly recommend getting those in early. So maybe shoot for January 15th at a minimum. But we're looking forward to your ideas and we appreciate your participation today.
Yeah. And I think just lastly, please, please, please just check out the website, the FAQs. Many of the questions that actually have come in are they're actually their answers are there. And the answers to so many other things are also there. There's also a really detailed table of NCS pathways and barriers that we've created for the RFP. So if you want further information on kind of what we have in mind and what those kind of broad bins are, that is there. And so much of a proposal slash LOI is really about the narrative case making. So tell us the story around and make the case for why your partnership and why the project and why that solution is really going to be a core component and a good fit for the RFP itself. So with that said, I
I
think,
actually want to jump in there real quick.
okay,
I
yeah,
misspoke
please.
earlier. So January 15th is the deadline, not January 16th. So apologies for that. Please reference all material on the webpage. But yes, thank you for your participation. And yeah, we look forward to seeing your LOIs.
All right, thanks so much, everyone.